Good afternoon to everyone who are following us in our live event. And first of all, I want to thank Mr. Stefano Boeri, that is the chairman of Triennale Milano, graduated in architecture at the Polytechnic in Milan, and the full professor in urban planning at Politecnico in Milan. And also, as many of you knows, is the creator of the concept of vertical forest that was realized in Milan in 2014. And thank you and welcome to Mr. Bijoy Jain, graduate at Washington University. Is currently teaching at the Accademia di Architettura in Mendrisio, Switzerland. And the furniture work of Bijoy Jain is part of the collection of Pompidou, Saint Pompidou in Paris. I will be very short. This e-talk is on architecture, the future of space, a dialogue between one of the most important Italian representative of design and architecture, Mr. Stefano Boeri, and one of the most known representative of Indian design and architecture, Mr. Bijoy Jain. This talk is in a framework of e-talks events. The Italian Embassy and our Consulate General in Mumbai and in Kolkata organize quite often. In this period of COVID-19, we work on a digital modality. We have transformed our embassy in a sort of digital embassy. And this e-format, there are so many in the plan of our embassy, also in the coming weeks, with representative of Italian culture and lifestyle and representative of Indian culture, lifestyle, and also business community. Thank you very much. I leave the floor and the video to Stefania Costanza from Mumbai to raise some question to our two very important representatives. That I thank you so much again.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's a pleasure to be here, and also a very difficult task that I have into facilitating the dialogue between these two great representatives of modern architect and the contemporary work. We're living definitely interesting times. And where space, of course, is both the positive and negative space is a matter of how our lives develop into a city, inside the cities. So both your works, they take very much stock of nature. So much that it seems all the time that the object of architecture is permanently engaged in a dialogue with the environment around it. It can be humans or flora or fauna. And it's not only a matter of forms, it's also a matter of the research of materials and techniques that are employed. So the aim, it seems to me that the aim is to have your creations as long-lastingly ones. But sustainability is definitely a multi-layered concept that certainly involves the conservation of nature, but also the enhancement of the socio-economic well-being of people, the indicators for the human well-being, and the ability of people of progress as a community, of sharing values and inhabiting common spaces. And sometimes those elements are at odds with each other. So my question is to both of you, how do you see the role of architecture in helping our cities becoming a conducive environment for a more equitable, multidimensional development? How do you see that?
Do you want to?
Bijoy, please Bijoy.
So firstly, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Stefania, for having me on this webinar, on this talk, and the pleasure of speaking with Stefano, who I know for having met earlier. I think it's an important question, and maybe I can just very quickly, summarize it just to sort of provoke the thought on, on the framework of the question. And I'm just, so Mumbai is a city of about 23 million people growing. As a city or as a geographical location, we're in a space where we have an abundance of water, we have an abundance of air, and we have an abundance of light. So air, water, and light is in abundance. But what you see or what has happened over a period of time, or what is happening over this period of time, is that we're doing everything to keep these three very fundamental elements out from the constructed space of the city, be it an interior or an exterior, where this natural phenomena, or where this phenomena of something that is very fundamental to our being, very fundamental to the aspect of what nourishes us, is in some way not made inclusive. Of course, this is also partly because of the codification of, how things are to be constructed, which are primarily based on, values of land, of square feet. So the measurements of how spaces are occupied are based on a sort of singular focus, while the other aspects, for me, which are as critical, are somehow not included. And this doesn't mean that one doesn't take away the sort of economic construct, of what enables cities to be built. But how do you embed, or how do you code within them these sort of very fundamental availabilities of materials that are primarily existent. So as a city, we have a shortage of water. We don't, or water is not in abundance. In terms of the construct of the physical spaces, you're sort of confined, just given the density of people in the city, that these things somehow can be included in some way too. And I'm just giving you an overview of how it can then be sort of a more shared idea. Of course, the dimensions, the economic physicalities can vary, but somehow the codification, can start including these very fundamental aspects that are already very much part of the present geography of the location. So I'm just setting up, of just something, using my own city as a space where, the possibility of this being included can be very easily slipped in.
I think this for Mumbai is very special, right? Mumbai is a very special morphology.
That can also, what Stefano has done, with the idea of a tower and this vertical forest, because in essence, what you're doing is increasing the surface the surface area for a greater absorption of water, air, and light. So it's like creating mountains, if you want to speak. So you're just, if you kind of made these towers on a flat surface, you basically just increased the surface area of, the landmass to be able to absorb these phenomena. And that's something that, I think Stefano can highlight through what he's doing.
Thank you. Just few words. So thanks so much, all of you, for inviting me, and it's really an honor to meet Joy. I really appreciate his work, and since a long time I follow what he does. And he's a maestro for all of us. So, well, what you are let's say, asking us to let's say, to observe a very delicate relation between living nature and the, let's say, artificial mineral sphere of the city. What I believe is that just as a first step, we cannot avoid to consider how the pandemics is strictly related with the climate crisis. So we cannot separate, split in different parts. I think that what we are experiencing in Europe, in India, in China, everywhere in the world, it's a very sudden and, let's say, unpredictable event that from many point of view, it could appear like a single episode. But if we observe how it's coming from some, let's say, spillover processes of the idea of zoonosis between the other living species and the human species, and if you put this sudden episode in the more general transformation provoked by global warming, by climate crisis, and so on, we can put also pandemics in a different light. And the first result of this different light is that probably we should go back to the normality in terms of daily life, lifestyle, which has inside it part of the reason of the pandemics. The first let's say, the first issue, it's about our relation with nature, because I think Bijoy knows, and Stefania and Vincenzo, you all know that we have just in last September we have included an exhibition in Triennale of Milano, who was promoted by Triennale together with BIE, Bureau International Exposition, which is based in Paris, and he was curated by Paolo Antonelli, who is a senior editor of design at MoMA, New York, and the title was Broken Nature. And we did our best to put in that exhibition, let's say, quite a large number of, let's say, solutions. So part of them are coming from the design field, other are coming from a more scientific and technological field, other again from an art field, but basically all of them, they are trying to restore our relation with nature and all repair. So the starting point of this Paula approach was extremely interesting and let's say fertile, was let's try to see how we can repair what we have broken, repair and redefine the relation in terms also of how we had contaminated nature in these last decades, how we could imagine to establish a relation which can improve this connection, this link. So basically, I think that what's happened in the last months has drastically changed our perspective. And probably if you could start again with this kind of exhibition, we could totally change the angle, also the key entries. So it's not us as a species that have contaminated nature, it's nature who has contaminated us. Nature is not something which is completely outside our body, outside our city, like we are normally using in our, let's say, disciplinary field that we use it to do. So we are imagining the relation between city and nature. City has a very clear, let's say, organism with its rules, with its dimension, and then outside we have nature. Or let's think to our body or our way to live, and how we consider, let's say, the idea of also of spillover infection, something can come from outside. So I think that this pandemics has in a certain way created the condition of a drastic change of perspective. It's not us contaminating nature, it's nature contaminating us. First. Second, nature is part of us. So it's something which is probably has to be observed from a physiological, from anthropological point of view, but I usually go back to what Michel Foucault was saying about madness as a metaphor of living nature, and is something which is inside us and comes up in a very, let's say, unpredictable, sudden way, that is not something where you can simply put outside and try to govern or to run. So all this, it's a very complicated, delicate, and urgent, let's say, serial of reasons to change the perspective also in our professional we are dealing with nature. And so I believe that also all what we could try to do in the future has to be seen in this different perspective. Just to go a little bit further, I think that what we have done, what we are doing with the vertical forest is thank you so much for what you're saying. It's a manifesto. It's a building. It's a very, let's say, that's very simple building because in itself is not very sophisticated as an architecture, but it has this, let's say, represent this attempt to put together living nature and an artificial building in a very, let's say, simple way. We use all what is green not as an ornament, not as a decoration or like a kind of ornamental addition. It's simply a combination of these two spheres. And like all this manifesto, which is a cultural and political manifesto, at the same time is an experiment. So it's a prototype of something that started to work, but it's still ongoing. So we follow with attention what is happening because it's a delicate ecosystem. We have let's say, well, 300 people there, but when 21,000, we have 20 different species of birds, thousands and thousands of insects. It's quite unbelievably strange how it works, and it's changed. Not simply the image, but also change the color, change its way to reflect the relation with the context, the city every season, because in winter time it becomes more like a very, let's say, trunk without all what the branch and the flower, and then it's in spring and summer time it's changed the shape, and it's becomes more different from what is around. So it's an ecosystem, and it's one of the possible way to try to imagine a future where city could englobe more natural environment in the sense of more vegetal species in terms of park, gardens, forest, trees, shrubs, plants, and so on. So it's not the unique way we have. It's one of the possible ways to concentrate in a very small urban surface a large number of vegetal species. But we have other, ways which are sometimes more, let's say, easier and simpler, like to multiply the number of gardens, to use the roofs to cultivate agriculture, or to have let's say, community garden, to create orbital forest around our cities. So I think it's we need this let's say, vegetal presence. Trees are absorbing CO2. Trees are absorbing the dust of urban pollution, and just to not forget that part of the reason of the, let's say, of the expansion, of the intensity of extension of the infection in Milan or in Madrid or in New York on the Hubei region is related with the presence of dust, of the dust created by the pollution on the air of our cities that has determined the condition of weakness, was, let's say, facilitated the extension of the city. So trees are absorbing dust, are absorbing CO2, are reducing the heat, are reducing the consumption of energy, are, let's say, implementing the biodiversity of living species. So there are so many reasons that just to think that in the future we have to really invest in the presence of trees. I conclude saying that cities are producing basically the 75% of the CO2 that we have in the atmosphere of our planet. And the forest and the woodland of the planet are absorbing the 30% of that CO2. So the more we are capable to have forests and trees inside our cities, the more we can really, let's say, try to tackle global warming and to fighting the enemy in its own land, in its own field. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the concept of healing our relations with nature is a very important one. And I think it applies also to Mumbai. to a certain extent, which is a city that experiences the monsoon every year, and it's a very special morphology. I would like to ask to Bijoy to elaborate a bit more about the relations between nature and Mumbai, especially. Thanks.
Brought that up as a sort of provocation of something that is very fundamental, and it's an interesting point because we've seen in this moment in the last few months, as we receded into our own dwellings, protected from the exteriority, how other aspects of nature, that we refer to nature, slowly were able to come in and infiltrate these spaces. And then Stefano rightly brings it up that I think we're as much part of that nature, that has infiltrated us. And from my point of view, this is something that I've observed, just in just observations of seeing, how quickly one can transform. But I think if we include ourselves as part of that transformation process, then the possibility of, invoking that can be fairly immediate in that sense. And that's why I kind of started with Mumbai, and I sort of brought this up of air, water, and light, because for me these are sort of very fundamental building blocks or building materials that we require for our existence. Not just to survive, but to live in a sort of wholesome, nourishing way. And that's why I kind of just very quickly sort of jumped into this, giving a sort of example of the nature of what the city is today and how it can be represented. And in a very short period of time, I think what's important is that what I think has transpired over a period of time also is that we've created hermetically sealed environments, where there is a clear inside and a clear outside. And there's no contact between these two environments. And so I think what then becomes critical is that in between space, what is the diaphragm or the bridge or the link that will allow this mutual communication of, where this transference can occur between our interiority and our physical exteriority, and likewise, vice versa, where what is interior becomes exterior, and so on and so forth. So for me, I think what's important to observe in all of this, there will be, this is life. I mean, there will be many other things that are going to unfold. Yes, we're in anticipation, if it's not already at our doorstep, this idea of, at a global level, climate change, Mumbai only last week had a cyclone hit its shores for the first time in the history of Mumbai, which is telling, so I think it's about also, this idea of erosion, so it requires, I think the pandemic in some way is a provocation of how do we want to move forward? How do we want to participate? How do we want to have a mutual exchange where it is going to be nourishing for us as well as what surrounds us, And I think these are the questions for me that have been provoked in the situation that we are in present day confronted with, let alone what is going to come next, And we were talking about it earlier. You've had the pandemic, you've had a sort of something in America, which is, a racial prejudice, which I think exists pretty much, in every part of the world, in every continent, that kind of, and yes, of course, this is going to take time. It's a process, but it has been called into immediate action in the sense there's an exponential acceleration that's taken place. There's this, the amount of space or time or distance between these events is narrowing, or the gap is getting closer and closer. So I think there's a sort of imminence, there's an imminent situation we are confronted with, and I think the questions are being asked to us, as individuals, as communities, as governments, as a global population of, what is the nature of how we want to interact, Yes, I mean, I know the show Broken Nature, that was presented at the Triennale, but I'm not so sure that, we can break ourselves, and I'm not, it's not a, a counter sort of to the title of the show. I'm aware of the intent of the show, but I think I'm more interested in this idea of how do we begin to heal, how does, and I think the question you're asking is, does what we do spatially have the capability or the ability to create a space where we can begin to heal environments? I think that's really what is, for me, being called upon. I mean, what I think is of imminent in nature is this aspect of healing, and what might be the vehicles, or what might be the modalities that would be required to mitigate this erosion that has taken place. I think at the end it's this haptic quality that we're after. Yes, the physical form will be n number of different expressions, and that's one part of architecture, which is not, with no judgment to good or bad. It's part of just the expression of that. But I think somewhere that seeking of this mutual relationship, this mutual exchange of a haptic sense, where it engages all the various aspects of what makes us resonate with space, And I think for me, somehow, if a place can provide for that, where at the end, I think the role of what we do at best is to, in some way, provide for a space that can enable this possibility. And that's why I started with Bombay the way it is right now, and how quickly it can actually be transformed. And I think it takes, collective will, to say that it's a concern of just governance and of government. I think that would be unfair, because that's, putting too much, responsibility to one sort of entity, and I think we've seen this, like even what's happening, unfolding in America, is this idea of sort of self-governance that is taking place, a way that you can participate in sections, in parts, to make a sort of bigger whole, and that's, so it's a sort of small parts that make a greater whole. Gandhi was a very big proponent of this idea of, these sort of individual entities or collective entities that, when formed together, sort of make a much bigger, more diverse, inclusive whole. But for me, I think that's really important, is what do we, as humans, as beings, what is it that we care about now? How do we want to move forward? And I think the provocation of what's transpiring today is really asking us those really very fundamental questions. And how do we want to participate moving forward?
Thank you, Bijoy, for this, because thanks to you both, actually, I think if I got it correctly, just to a bit sum up what you were both saying, is that we need to be resilient in a dynamic way, not just to bounce back where we were, but just a different kind of resilience that makes us move forward. And probably what came to my mind is that cities were imagined historically to be a shelter, to protect ourselves from nature. But it seems from what Mr. Boeri was saying, from what Bijoy was saying before, it's like today the way we can be protect the most is going outside, is having nature with us. It's a less separate way of being protective as human being, quite a more holistic way that we conceive cities, which are exactly, again, meant just to protect ourselves. And cities can be also difficult to intervene from an aesthetical point of view, because we both share. I live in India. I'm Italian. I know far too well how these two nations share together an historical heritage that is cultural, is artistic, and it's fantastic. It's the reason why we do understand each other so well. We speak the same language of beauty, but it might also be a burden in terms of conservations and in terms of confronting yourself in your work with how the city is being structured so far. You both speak a new language compared to Milan and Mumbai in this case that you work worldwide, both of you. You're an international architect, but let's say since right today you're sitting in Milan and in Mumbai, these are very two historically contaminated cities strongly, but your language is very innovative for the cities, for the context. And it must not be so easy. So can I ask you how you do see the relation between the past and the future when it comes to plan new spaces for people to be there? Maybe Mr. Boeri wants to comment on that.
It's a very, very, let's say, uh, complex and rich question. First of all, my friend Emanuele Coccia, who is a philosopher, is an Italian philosopher based in Paris, teaching called Les Études en Sciences Sociales. And what he says is that why shouldn't we consider a forest as a monument? How we are so, let's say, obsessional with the idea of, let's say, taking care of history only in our artificial creation and not on history of a woodland, history of a trees, the biography of a tree, the biography of a plant. We have really completely forgotten that nature is a continuous exchange and contamination of elements, materials that are, let's say, making our world one world that we are, let's say, really sometimes blind. We are totally blind. We are not, let's say, capable to see how the future, the present, the past are not only in what we have done, what we have created, what the other all species have done, but there is a, let's say, the time is absorbing all our living sphere. So say that I think that our work, our profession, what Bijoy and me we do is to anticipate the future. Basically, we do our best to anticipate the future of the inhabited spaces. But inhabited space, a room, or let's say a house, or a part of a garden, or let's say a valley. So it's quite a large concept. And I understand very well that it's quite complicated now because it's a moment of our life in which the dimension of time that we are used to consider as something which is totally, let's say, not in our capacity control, like the long process of transformation of the planet, became, thanks to the evidence of climate crisis, strictly connected with the daily cycles of our lives. So what we do, how we are deciding to plan our diet, how we are imagining to move, which kind of transportation system we can select, the relation we have with the plants. So all these, let's say, elements of our daily life has become part, like a kind of short circuit, part of a very strong relation with the dimension of the long process that changed the history of the planet. So this very strange condition of the present, which has to deal with the future of humanity, it's very, very, let's say, recent. And I believe this is also the fact that we are seriously considering the possibility of extinction of our species. And we consider that perspective in the light of what we do every day, all together. And we know that probably only if we are, let's say, available to do all together our best immediately to change our lifestyle, we could do something to avoid this, let's say, horizon of possible extinction that is there. And for, I imagine, for the new generation, it's so, let's say, it's conditioning also the vision of the future. It's conditioning their mood, their behavior, their lifestyle. So I think it's a very, very crucial moment. And I repeat that this crisis, and also let me say what we have seen in the States about racism and social justice is another, let's say, wow, unbelievable, powerful, let's say, element that enters in our presence. So we have to combine this for crisis. One is about the evidence of the condition of inequality, which is everywhere in the planet. And it's, let's say, so basic that in a certain way, how we could have the right to talk about the future of our species, about the possible evolution, if we are still not able to guarantee a condition of social justice for let's say, part of the population of the planet, first. But we are talking about something which is present now, but started, let's say, centuries ago. Then we have the financial crisis, which is present everywhere. We know that the last evidence was in 2007-8 with Lehman Brothers and 2011, but it's there, and we are experiencing it now. Then we have the climate crisis that was starting probably in the 18th century, so with the industrialization, urbanization, but its evidence came up in 2015 in Paris, the Pope and so on, but it's now. And then we have the pandemics, which is also not something which is new because we know now, but we now feel, understand what's happening. So it's, let me say, amazing how these four tendencies, like the long process that l'école des annales in French was saying, so there are long processes that start, let's say, under the surface of the world that comes up all together now. So it's a very, very, very specific, peculiar moment.
Indeed, and I really like very much this way of being architects involved in your community, involved in your world, involved in your present. This is exactly why I fell in love with architecture, and I think so many other who are not technicians are just enthusiasts, because you have the ability to be militant in a way, not just for beauty, but for the vision that you have of the future. And I think this attains very much also to Bijoy. I know he is very much involved always in everything he does. So I would like to also hear from you, Bijoy, how you see the relation with the taking action. What you were saying before, it's action now. How an
Yeah, I think
architecture
you
does
also,
that.
yeah, you've posed the question of, how do you see the relation between the past and the future? And, we can also address this from a very recent past, which is, a week ago or a month ago or 3 months ago. And, what we're looking at is a different set of conditions. Somehow, personally, for me, I'm more optimistic, I'm not sure if we are built fundamentally to annihilate ourselves, as natural construct of nature. That's not our instinct. And I also feel that there are moments when we come under extreme constriction or extreme sort of, where the space sort of narrows in or sort of tightens up. I think that's the point where I think somewhere we find a space. There's always space in some ways is vast and large, and so, and hence I started off with this idea of we're fundamentally optimistic, and I think finding that space, digging into that space. I mean, Europe has seen two very large wars at a scale. We've recovered from that. We've bounced back from that. There's been inventions. There's been, discoveries, from the industrial to the digital, and all the things. And for me, it's not about the past as something that is, left behind, or the future that is to come. And I think for me, it's more about what you draw and what you learn from them, and not in a nostalgic way or not necessarily in a romantic way about, and I think one of the things I think we are confronted with is our ability to change. That's why I talk about acceleration, speed, distance, and the ability for one to change. Of course, there will be groups of people that will be able to do that. Sometimes out of just sheer need, sometimes out of just pure creativity because the situation demands the immediacy or the imminence for that to occur. So I think it's again for me. I'm more interested in finding that gap in between, more the in between space, more the connections. What you transfer from one to the other, or transfer back from what's forward to what was there before. It's an opportunity for us to the experience enables us to learn, to grow. And I think somewhere what's transpired is that, this, and I want to say that I think sympathetic or sort of this idea of being gentle, is a phenomena that I think somewhere collectively that needs to be reinstated into the conversation, of what we see between, different periods of time or different periods of phenomena that we have experienced or are experiencing, of even phenomena that are going to occur. And it's not so much about being prepared. It's not so much about, it's about being restful, knowing that these phenomena are going to occur. We are going to have this split. That's part of human, that's part of gravity. That's part of living in a space where we are all confronted with gravity. Gravity, and I've sort of talked about this, where you can look at gravity as a force that is pushing you down, or you can take that what is an egalitarian sort of energy source or an energy force, and use it in a way that completely, I'm not saying opposes it, that works with it to sort of, in a way, transcend that, to sort of, how do I say, you can use it as a trajectory to oppose it or go in the opposite way as opposed to coming down. I mean, that's what we're fundamentally, made for. So in that sense, I'm very optimistic, and the fact that, yes, all of this is now coming to the surface. It's time that it is now coming to the surface for us to ask certain very fundamental questions of, how do we want to live? What is the kind of quality that we want to exist in? Our skin is made to absorb everything, not just, air, water, and light, but, sound and, other aspects that resonate in how we are able to, how do I say, to document or to be able to spatially organize ourselves. I think these are the, fundamental questions that are there. And of course, there are facilities that can be moved fairly quickly. I mean, $1 trillion right now in America have just been given away because of the pandemic. And, we can put these resources that are actually available, of where do we want to put these resources into? I mean, war is going to be there, that conflict, to say that that's going to go away would be foolish on our part. Prejudice for that to exist, it exists in so many different layers and ways. How do we find ways to, in some way, neutralize what is conflict within our own selves, and how do they become reflective as spatial configurations within our built landscape, How do we become more empathetic to a diversity of cultures? I mean, this is something that's always interested me. And there's films, there's a beautiful film about flamenco music that moved from, from the northern part of this country all the way into Europe. And it's quite an interesting film where, and it brought up the question that there are people that, for them, the sky is their roof, And do cities include a space like that within the city? Can it include? We've kept those spaces and people out as a way of, not, we see it in a different way. That I think the ethos, the ethics, I think those need to be redrawn. For me, that's the part. I mean, I think the codification, how do you embed and how do you recode or, decode, cities as spatial devices? I think those are things that are being called upon in this particular time. For me, it's not so much about past or present or future. It's about, how to sort of coalesce what we've learned from what we've experienced, and how we can use that to anticipate, how do we find the space that will be able to contain us in a more holding way? Because I think conflicts will be there of some kind or the other. It's just like I said, that's the function of gravity.
I do share that very much. I think being gentle should be a value per se, and we definitely have to recuperate that. But especially what struck me is that I thought I would have asked questions, but both of you raised so many questions. And I think this is critical because we are living times where we need to ask ourselves the right questions. Only if you formulate right questions, you will have the right answers. So I think that we are running out a bit of time. And I don't want to abuse. I know you both have a very, very tight agenda. I would like to personally thank you very much because for me it was extremely interesting. You just fulfilled some of my curiosities, and especially you raised more. I will study, and next time, if I have the opportunity, I will ask you more. But I would like to ask to His Excellency the Ambassador of Italy to India, Ambassador De Luca, just to conclude this interesting webcast. Thank you. Grazie.
Thank you, Stefania. I cannot conclude this kind of dialogue because nobody can conclude this dialogue. There are so many open questions. I think a key message is that now it's time also to discuss, to act, to be able to make also this crisis an opportunity to think about our future, and also to, let's say, learn from the past experience, but project this experience in the future, to have a global commitment for an abused expression that is a sustainable world. But this is the reality we have to face today together. All institution, private sector, architecture, designer, all the people all over the world have today the same question: how to give answer to the question of a sustainable order, a sustainable world, how we face the challenges together with a joint commitment all over the world. This is very interesting to have this dialogue between Italy and India. We will chair as Italy and India to G20. G20 is the format where many of these issues will be addressed, but this dialogue today gave us a lot of inspiration and also a lot of stimulation to our discussion, to our debate, to our commitment. Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Bijoy Jain. Thank you very much for having accepted this invitation. I hope that also for you was a useful opportunity.
Absolutely.
To have this
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.